Jeff felt that after 10 years after his death, nobody would remember.
Yeah, he uses it as a lyric. You know, in 10 years, who'll even remember?
And yet, here we are.
Planned obsolescence and also, you know, an apocalyptic mindset.
22 years later, and people are about to release, 4 albums Mute's working on?
Welcome, it's Unsung Podcast. I'm Mark, joined by Chris.
Yes, you join us in the Unsung studio, courtesy of No Mean Radio and Variety Bar in Glasgow, on what's left of Sauchiehall Hall Street, or should that be Sinky Hole Street?
Sinky Hole Street. You die yet?
This is a serialised drama now, because those who listen to the podcast regularly may remember that last week, before we ruined our professional careers with that episode, we also described an unfolding travesty on Sauchiehall Hall Street as the ground collapsed in a sort of Mayan catastrophe. And an
astral disaster.
Yes.
The sort of Tremors-esque, you know, you've seen Tremors? The Tremors-esque kind of sinkhole has now turned into a full excavation. So if at some point you hear a fourth voice in the room, it's probably because a road worker tunnelled into the studio. But you certainly will be hearing a third voice in the room, because we're joined this week by, Phil Eaglesham, aka P6 of OMO and many more besides. Hi, Phil.
Hello,
Phil.
I'm delighted to be invited back, considering I broke your minds last time.
You broke our minds, but you also
expanded them at the same time.
Well, more to the point, you got us some juicy ratings, and we were like, let's get them back.
That's great, but that's on trend.
On the socials. On the socials.
Well, what we're doing today is kind of on that tip, definitely.
So, Phil, I'm going to do a very professional segue here. So, you're of OMO at the moment, kind of doom. What'd you call it again? Doom
Cabaret?
Cabaret, yeah, band. But I know that you do more than that. You have some solo stuff. You have a thing that's on a hiatus at the moment called Security, is that right?
Yeah, I've got a kind of synth, industrial synth project with Joe Ahmed called Security. We've collaborated,
well.
and I've been asked to celebrate Exit's 3rd birthday in a few weeks, in 3 weeks, I think, which I'm going to do with an old comrade and probably major on a kind of Temple of Psychic Youth playlist, and then do some performance. So,
there we go. We arrive at the station, because I'm going to guess that some of your electronic and more avant-garde sensibilities owe a little bit of a debt to the stuff we're going to talk about today.
100%.
Yep. So who are we covering?
We're going to dip into the world of Coil.
Can you really dip into Coil?
We're going to dip into the sewer pipe of culture that is Coil. We're going to get quite dirty.
We're going to go down the anal staircase.
Yep.
100%.
Over the next 2 episodes, just to be clear.
Well, it has to be said, it's great. It's great to be able to champion something, but also I'm really up for your responses and your kind of whether you're interested or whether you're repulsed.
I'm really up for Mark's responses, because every so often an episode comes along that the boy has to take a really deep breath before he starts his research.
I think it's going to. I think it'll surprise you.
Good. So from that, people who are uninitiated, well, the thing is, you may be uninitiated in terms of Coil directly, but you've almost certainly heard of many of the bands who have either worked with them or were massively influenced by them. This was a huge undertaking, I think, as a subject. So we actually booked it in advance, set up a special private WhatsApp group.
It's been daunting.
And got ourselves dug in. Phil provided some of the most exemplary assistance and resources. And in fact, I think for the first time ever, we may put some of the resources up as, like a visual guide as we do the episode. So, for example, your map of the albums that we've been talking about, that visual map of the albums, if we can maybe use that.
Yeah, I'm not the author, but I think the author is credited on it, and I think it was really useful to help kind of navigate a little bit.
Supremely useful, yeah. So I think we'll probably make that available for folks who are going to listen. So if you are listening, Mark, how can they get hold of that PDF?
Well, it will be available in the show notes underneath, and you might see it also a screenshot of it if you're watching it on YouTube as well.
Yeah, and we'll stick a link under the episode as well.
I'm happy enough to share my notes now that I've cross-checked them with a comrade, and I think the contentious nature of who owns what and the legacy is
Credit
also
where
something
it's due.
that's quite interesting.
Who's the comrade that we owe thanks to?
Tony Dickey, who for decades has run a blog called Compulsion Online. It was actually a hard copy A5 fanzine for many years.
Yeah.
And Tony and I have been friends for many, many years, probably actually going back to this period, just about when I finished my psychiatric nurse training. And we were both at the same time writing to Jeff and Sleazy and writing to other bands in that kind of industrial genre. And one of the few kind of weirdos in Paisley that were really into that shit.
Thank you for your help, Tony. I believe you have an even more encyclopedic knowledge of this band than Phil. I do also want to add as a note for people that didn't hear or see the first episode featuring Phil. Phil trained as a psychiatric nurse and was a resident at a psychiatric hospital during that period, right? And as a result, he corresponded with a lot of the bands that we're going to talk about. Now, you actually brought in some amazing artifacts. One of them we'll save for later.
I have some correspondence
staring right at me right now, but these ones were addressed to you, and what I can never get away from the novelty factor of the people that were, you're writing to them as a fan and they're writing back to you at a psychiatric hospital, and given the style of music, the whole milieu, they must have got such a kick out of that, right?
I mean, a bit of arse slightly in the Stretchheads, it has to be said, but this is pre-Stretchheads. This is the stuff that I was into before I even thought about becoming, what I became. And it is nice to have those kind of artifacts and Jeff's writing and letters, and you see this stuff. I mean, it's kind of grim and a bit ghoulish, but you see this stuff up for sale all the time. But I really cherish the fact that we had this kind of correspondence for a couple of years, and it also gives a wee bit of insight into some of the hiccups, some of the intentions that they maybe had early doors as a band, some of the fallouts that they had, as we'll discuss, in terms of meeting the man and suddenly becoming part of the opportunity to be corporate, and then recoiling and, no pun intended, but actually
pun received, though.
But following their own path. So it maybe my letters kind of around that period capture some of that experience as well.
It's really humanising as well. It does strike me, without meaning to go on too much of a tangent here, how it is a totally lost world of interaction back when, you were saying you wrote to this P.O. box for a number of different acts.
Yeah.
And they had all this stuff that they were putting together for people who were followers of them and sending it out. And you're getting these kind of hand-curated things, these like little mementos, thank yous. Like, it's not like a fan club, but it's really, really fascinating
it's
stuff.
So DIY.
Yeah, it is, and it's gone. It's gone as a part of the music culture. Maybe it will come back. Maybe there will be some sort of resurgence of it. But it's a fairly incredible thing that I think a lot of the listeners that are our age and younger will just not be familiar with.
And it means as well, when I do eventually meet Jeff and Sleazy again in person, they're like, "Oh, you're that guy."
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
20 years later.
Yeah, because these are handwritten letters.
Yeah.
They're not like copied emails. They're handwritten letters. It's really fascinating stuff. So we'll take some pictures of them and we'll post them up. But Phil, a couple of things you've got there. There's 3 or 4 like handwritten letters I noticed.
Yeah, I've got some correspondence. I mean, I think, again, as you say, to emphasise the DIY nature at the time, you have like little mail order catalogues. Mick Gaffney was a really interesting guy at the time that was doing mail order stuff, and he actually compiled this Open the Blood Gate, which, a bit like the Cabaret Voltaire's inclusion in the Industrial Handbook, is a fantastic A to Z of the shit that they were into, quite literally, and the art that they were into, the bands they were into, like big Butthole Surfers fans. Like, they were really promoting a lot of really interesting art.
Butthole Surfers getting a mention really early on, like really early on. Yeah, well, like 86, that kind of time.
And there's even a little Christmas card from the guys.
That's amazing. Yeah, a Christmas card from the
7
band.
cardinal sins.
That is absolutely awesome.
Happy Christmas from the horse rotivator. So
nice.
Don't get that for Kanye. Or if you do.
But I think they might seem very untouchable and seem very ethereal, and it all becomes very mystic, and I think we can deconstruct that a little bit. But actually, they were very human and very very approachable, and considering where they sprung out of, which we might cover as well, which was actually quite a corporate world where, Temple of Psychic Youth and where Psychic TV came from, they actually deliberately went down a DIY route and wanted that kind of, to me, wanted to both follow their own path, and they also wanted that human connection in a way when they deprogrammed themselves from what was essentially a cult of personality.
So there's also a couple of books. You've not brought the books, you brought a couple of scans here, but just for folks that like what we're talking about or are interested in the subject, Phil, you want to name check those books?
I would recommend, with a little caution, but I would recommend David Keenan's England's Hidden. What is it called again? England's Hidden Reverse. Forgive me.
Hidden Reverse.
England's Hidden Reverse. And this is a facsimile of the original version of it, which came out. I think I'm pausing as well because, I remember writing to him at the time and he had some reservations, and I think it's a bit of an edited, kind of potted history of what was going on at that period.
He revised it? Cause
he subsequently published a revised version. But to take on Coil, Current 93 and Nurse with Wound, probably at a time when a lot of people thought those bands were over, and to get it published is definitely an achievement. I think he had his own kind of biases, but I'm also... I do have some perspective, I think, on kind of Wire magazine musicians kind of coming along and in a way kind of congratulating a lot of this stuff when actually it wasn't really written for them.
And what's the other one as well? Because this one I do know a wee bit.
Nick Soulsby's collection of pretty much all the interviews, a bit like the Cabaret Volatire episode. It's been phenomenal to have access to all of these interviews that Coil did. It has to be said,
everything keeps dissolving.
Everything keeps dissolving, and there's a supplement to it as well, and it was done in a beautiful edition. And I think just letting the band speak for themselves is probably, for me, it's probably better than having a journalist's perspective on them, because it can be a bit contrived. But I do think that he's done an amazing job in capturing, for me as well. It was rare that they gave any interviews. They were, as we might discuss as well. Square Peg is included there. I remember being a wee queer guy and picking up a copy of Square Peg in a pauper's shop, basically. There was very little media at the time. There was, as we'll probably cover, there was a huge social clampdown on LGBT plus rights. There was the shadow of AIDS. There was a lot of fear around. So being able to capture and get hold of little magazines that had like Coil and Kathy Acker in it, these were like little nuggets that kind of orientated you a wee bit and helped you feel that you could continue to be a bit of a rebel. And also that there were humans in the sphere that were actually on your side.
Yeah, we're going to touch on a couple of those subjects in a little bit more detail. And it does get heavy. The music is heavy at times. The subjects are quite heavy at times. The weight of the music can be quite oppressive, although there is a bit of levity, as this artifact that we'll reveal later on testifies to. But yeah, in terms of, before we get waded into the episode, a little bit of a due diligence. We need to pay for a holiday for Mark to help him recover from the research that he's done on this. Okay,
I'm going to Gothenburg, so I'll be fine.
No, Mark needs
massage in Gothenburg
alongside Jeff Ellis. Needs a week on a beach and some Weezer.
I think Jeff's fine somehow.
So if you're listening to this and you like it, dip into your pockets and subscribe to Unsung Podcast, or you could even donate to the Mark Fraser Recovery Magic Fund. Now I want to note that everything there is spelled with a CK because that's how you do it.
100%.
Yeah,
that's how you align the stars.
Yeah, Mark, how do people subscribe or donate?
So my PayPal is at Mark Daily Discord. You can go and find it there. But no, you can go to patreon.com/unsungpod, where you can sign up for our Patreon and get access to episodes a few days early and some bonus stuff and whatever other odds and sods we can chuck your way. Yeah, that's £4 a month minimum, and then we've also got a record club at £15 a month. You
also get access to the Temple of Unsung Youth, which is a Facebook group, funnily enough, the domain of the right wing. And you can suggest
where you can be heavily criticised, as absolutely. I probably will be,
and collaborate with Boyd Rice. And you can suggest episodes to us, which is something that actually does happen from time to time.
Yeah. So, that's that. So, shall we dig into this then?
Phil, we actually, from amongst this vast trove of music, we did ask you to pick out some things that you thought would be particularly worth people focusing on that maybe get a little bit overlooked. Do you want to talk us through what you went for?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as we'll discuss, there's an amazing trajectory and there's some real highlights, but I think an overlooked piece, and also quite similar maybe to the Cabaret Volatire discussion that we had, was a transitional object, and that's Coil presents Black Light District.
Yeah, I think we'll get into it, but I can hear the cab vol for sure.
Yep. 1,000 lights in a darkened room, which is for many reasons, I think, transitional in terms of their membership, in terms of where they're going spiritually, in terms of, as we'll discuss also, where their relationship is going as lovers. And the context of what's happening at that period in a time, I would say, just before we weren't fucking in the streets, but we kind of got some relief a few years later in terms of what AIDS was doing.
Yeah, that's some really, really interesting backdrops to this. So we'll come around to why you think listeners should give that a particular listen shortly. Just to kind of, from my own perspective, to kind of shed a bit of light on this, my first introduction to Coil was a remix of Gave Up by 9 Inch Nails from the Broken EP along with Danny Hyde at the time. He was credited separately. They've worked with 9 Inch Nails a lot, so if you're listening, you're like, oh, this is familiar, that might be where it's from, if you're a normie like me. And they even have a record, in fact, called Recoiled, which is a collection of unreleased 9 Inch Nails remixes that includes the version of Closer from the credits of Seven, the movie, I believe. If you've ever seen that and wondered, what version is that? I don't recognise it. They did it. But honestly, despite liking what they did with 9 Inch Nails, who I was, fervently getting into at the time, I never clicked with Coil. I mean, I was like 15 years old. And it was a little bit too much for me. It was a little bit too hard. I think I've thus spent a lot more time with the artists that they inspired than I have with them directly. So, Phil, as an OG Coil fan, maybe you can give us the full story. And a good place to start, you actually kind of touched on it there, is who is Coil, the two constant members of Coil, who, as you mentioned, were actually in a relationship for a large part of that time as well. Yeah. Take us through it.
Well, Jeff Rushton, as he was born, Jeffrey Nigel Lawrence Rushton, born in 1962, actually formed Coil himself and was a remarkable teenager.
As using the name Jhonn Balance, is that right?
He took the moniker Jhonn Balance, and he formed Coil. Probably, I would say, maybe we're looking at his late teens. This is someone who, had many monikers, which I think we'll start to unpack a little bit in terms of John's mental state and where he ends up. But he initially started in 1982, and I'm not sure if he was involved, and he was writing to Sleazy at the point where Throbbing Gristle were, they were playing like Oundle School. They were playing like private.
That's right.
Private schools.
Did he not?
I think he might have written to TG at the time and written to Sleazy.
So he had some part to play in Throbbing Gristle coming and playing at a school, perhaps? Yeah.
Live at Oundle is one of the greatest. You can get it on the box set and the visual box set that Chris Carter produced, but it's an extraordinary performance. I mean, the audience of adolescent boys are like screaming cozy, like get your tits out, and they all erupt into a version of Jerusalem at the end of the gig.
Jerusalem at the end of the gig.
I mean, it's almost, if you've ever seen that what's that film, that Lindsay Anderson film, If? Incredible. It's just like...
It's a really odd coping mechanism, isn't it? They've kind of like tried so hard and a little bit traumatised by their inability to process the art of what they've just seen that they resort to Jerusalem as a comfort blanket of it's really... It's surreal.
But Jeff, as he was at the time, was writing a fanzine called Stab Mental, highly collectible, and was championing not only Throbbing Gristle, but also people like Zev, amazing industrial musician who we sadly lost, bands like Clock DVA, and also, as we'll maybe mention, the Virgin Prunes.
That's right.
Who are highly significant. My favourite Irish band ever. Very transgressive, very performance-rooted, but also they're fucking banging as a, you know, if you want to just call them a goth band or whatever, they're really banging.
So I believe that Jeff interviewed Throbbing Gristle in 1980. Yeah.
Really early doors, and he is, you know, he's super young, and obviously, and he had a very disrupted childhood and potentially quite an abusive childhood. So he's actively seeking that kind of sense of rebellion and that otherness and that othering, and I think projecting that onto TG. And so he actually records his Coil prior to his involvement with Sleazy, with Peter Sleazy Christopherson, and then they kind of become a duo in 1983, and they're both involved with Psychic TV. They're both members of Psychic TV.
Yeah, well, actually, Peter Christopherson had been a member of Throbbing Gristle as well. Yeah. And kind of met Jhonn Balance or Jeff that way. And as you say, a member of Psychic TV as well. So
they form Psychic TV, and this might be the point to wave the phallus, but Psychic TV, they are one branch of what explodes from TG when it basically collapses.
The other being
Chris and Cozy. They do their own thing. They sign with Rough Trade, and they follow a beautiful electronic path. And then Jen and Sleazy, along with Alex Ferguson from Alternative TV, highly significant punk band, and great songwriter. They found Psychic TV, and then they become a bit of a constellation of all of these artists, and people like David Tibet, people like Jeff, like Jhonn Balance, are all involved. Paula, who is Jen's new partner, you know, so they form a bit of a collective in London, and they become a bit of a hub for a lot of what becomes kind of industrial music. But they also sign to Warner Brothers, and they get so much money in comparison to, you know, Chris and Cozy are living in a one-bedroom flat in Soho, and Cozy's going out at night and stripping just to make money because she's expecting with Nicky, our son, and there's so much money slushing around in the British music scene at the time, and Steve-O of Some Bizarre Records is so eloquent, and so to me, he's got such a roster of these weird bands, but he gets it all over the line, and he gets these bands like major record deals in lots of cases, and Psychic TV,
and then doesn't settle his debts with them.
Well, then he absolutely fleeces them, which is, you know, what is this? It's an age-old story of music management. But as part of that, and as part of the promotion of that,
here we go.
And I think this is Sleazy's idea personally, but Jen and Sleazy commission these 23 gold dildos, as they called them, but they're actually made of brass. They're very heavy, and on the tip, on the tip of them, it's the record companies that refuse to sign them, and they send them out as a fuck you to record labels that didn't sign them when they've signed to Warner Brothers for a substantive amount of money. And the legend is it's not sure whether the dick is actually based on Jhonn Balance's or possibly Derek Jarman's. And Derek Jarman was very involved originally with Psychic TV in terms of their video production, because they were a bit like Cabaret Volatire. They were a video production company. The music was coincidental. They were producing artifacts, and they were playing around with art. So, you know, I'm honoured to be able to hold on to that at some point and polish it.
You bought that in D-Bay.
Yes, absolutely. in the cock economy that I'm clearly
sitting atop.
Absolutely.
So, as you say, member of Psychic TV. I think at some point Jhonn Balance also did stuff with Lustmord. Is that right?
I'm not sure if he was connected, because Lustmore was probably an SPK at that point. I would say.
I thought they'd worked
so
together.
They might have connected, definitely. And you know, and Jeff actually is I haven't really unpacked it, but Jeff was collaborating with all sorts of bands at that time. But they clearly drew a line, and while Sleazy particularly was heavily involved in the formation of the Temple of Psychic Youth, which was, you know, on one hand, it was an extended fan club. On the other hand, it was an occult kind of gateway and a bit of a cult of personality. and they were very clear from the beginning that they found that all kind of everything orbited around Jen, and they could smell a fucking trap. So
yeah, Temple
so
of
they got
Psychic
out.
Youth seemed like a cult of personality for Genesis Peorage,
Yeah.
and they were not comfortable with that at all.
Yeah, and I think it served its purpose in terms of, to some extent, the visuals around it and the concept around it was really interesting. And I would always give Jen credit for being a very effective magpie and a gateway to quite a lot of really interesting stuff. But quite early doors for me. I mean, we're talking kind of 84. A couple of years later. Coil for me were opening doors to much more interesting stuff and much more queer tinged stuff. And even to this day, I mean, I find the whole idea that people are members of this Temple of Psychic Youth, but it's quite binary. So you were I think you were either Eden or Kali, and you would have a little name, which is just like straight out the cult playbook.
Yeah, well.
And you're living communally, and all of that kind of stuff. And it's interesting as well. I mean, in terms of Topi, I think some of the ideas as well were taken from Monte Casaza, a very important West Coast American artist, and he coined the phrase industrial music. So
That's
I think
right,
he was plundering. Jen was maybe plundering from some of that, and I think
Jen, without getting too far down the Throbbing Gristle path, I mean, Jen was very much that kind of into the neo-shamanistic sort of occult world of quasi-natural philosophy and things like that,
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people were into Crowley, which isn't actually new. I mean, it's actually very 60s, and a lot of rock bands were into Crowley, but he was lifting from that. But the most significant kind of marker for me about Temple of Psychic Youth, and I think Jen was open about this, was the Process Church of the Final Judgment, and that was a kind of apocalyptic cult where God or Jehovah, Christ, Satan, and Lucifer would all kind of preside over the end of times. And they were, unfortunately though, they were at one point linked to the Manson family.
Sounds like a tag team.
Which was absolutely
tag team title.
Satanic wrestling. And he modelled a lot of the visuals and a lot of the kind of context on the Process Church, and wanted to kind of have his own little fan club. But it very much became his fan club, I think. He at the time, obviously, Jen became more less binary later on. So I think I'm grateful actually that at that point I could see a break from it, and I could not. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I was still really interested in what Psychic TV were doing. I think that's a whole different episode and story. There are some really interesting people that were involved in that as a collective for many years. Many of them still wear the scars. But I think Coil for me was a shift, particularly at that time. I came out when I was 19. So you're looking at me doing my psychiatric nurse training. Yeah, I'm really interested in Carlos Castaneda, and I'm really interested in Aldous Huxley and all of that 60s stuff and the beats, and and that's kind of resonating a bit with Temple of Psychic Youth. But then also I'm needing and I'm wanting more of a kind of queer compass on where things are going. And yes, things are quite apocalyptic, but what are we going to do about that, and what are we going to learn from and take from that? And Coil, quite early doors, as we'll probably describe, they provided a handbook around that stuff. Around the esoteric stuff that wasn't tainted with becoming a cult of personality and everybody orbiting around Genesis prior Peorage as they became.
So fast forward, and those two members, Jeff, aka Jhonn Balance, and Peter Christopherson, or Sleazy as you're saying, neither are with us anymore. I believe that, well, perhaps you can take us through it. Jeff had serious struggles with alcoholism, is that right?
Laterally, and I think there's a pivot in the discography. There's a pivot, as a lot of people did actually, and friends that I kind of lost, or friends that became a bit lost for a while, around that period of the rave movement and the kind of the slightly post-rave era, that people just took a bit too much. Yeah, so, and I feel that you can trace back Jeff's latter, Balance's latter, substance use issues and mental health problems. You can trace some of that being exacerbated by that period of hedonism. But I personally feel that his mental state actually traced back more to his childhood.
So it Peter, I listened to a number of interviews in the build up to this, and Peter felt they indulged in a big way in the clubbing scene when they were going through a certain phase in the late 80s, early 90s, and took a lot of substances, especially like ecstasy.
Yeah.
And Peter's take was that Jeff's come downs were getting so severe that he basically started medicating with alcohol.
Yeah.
It was his coping mechanism, because as he got older, he was dealing so badly with the come downs from the ecstasy. Again, the ecstasy, really fascinating things out there that Peter talking about how they used it for connection, how the gay community, in the midst of the AIDS crisis, couldn't really indulge physical contact freely the same way they had, and so they were looking for connection in, via psychedelics, via drugs like that, and often overindulging in those drugs.
And if you look at the pre-AIDS period as well, MDA was a massive thing in the gay scene. I mean, we tend to be quite early adopters. So
yeah, you guys are ahead of the curve.
In technology, psychedelics, we tend to be quite early adopters of that, and then we wire that sometimes to our pleasure centres, but we also kind of wire that a bit to community. So when MDMA comes along, a lot of people are quite familiar with it, and then to some extent, they weren't impoverished, so they were probably seducing themselves into the idea that they were, taking high quality medication or high quality substances, and that they would somehow be spared.
Yeah.
Which is a classic. Again, it's a classic addictive kind of wiring of your brain and rationale.
Yeah.
And it did kind of come back to bite them, and it did impact on their relationship.
So Peter reckons that once Jeff got into that habit of alcohol, that he just never really got out of it again. And in 2004, I believe he fell over a banister in his home whilst really quite inebriated, and never recovered from that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would never underestimate, a bit like the Cabaret Volatire episode, I would never underestimate actually Jeff's musical contribution. And as we said, we just messaged each other this week. There's a really early Coil track. Sleazy's nowhere near it, and Mark Hammond is playing guitar on it.
Oh, that's brilliant.
So like the relationship with Zoskaya, and to me there was like he was a really interesting musician. I mean, he was playing bass with an Ebo in Psychic TV.
What was the name of that track that I sent you?
Oh, I couldn't tell you. Restless Day.
Restless Day, that's
Restless
the one.
Day. It was on an Animal Liberation Front compilation.
Yeah, I had never heard it before. It was apparently meant to be in Scatology, but got left off.
Aye. It's on the... but I think... Well, I think when things get reissued, they get kind of clustered together.
Yeah.
So there was a rationale from some Bizarre Records, I think, to kind of put all of that together and kind of almost recompile it.
But yeah, like, I mean, there's... As we'll eliminate really soon, there is so much Coil material out there, and it has led to a frenzy of compilations, a frenzy of, as you say, artifacts in a way of like cashing in on a band and a legacy that I think the members certainly. I mean, you said something earlier on before we started recording about how Jeff felt that 10 years after his death, nobody would remember.
Yeah, he uses it as a lyric. In 10 years, who'll even remember?
And yet, here we are.
Planned obsolescence, and also, an apocalyptic mindset.
22 years later, and people are about to release, 4 albums Mute's working on?
Well, Stephen Thrower has now kind of hooked up with Mute Records, and, Stephen's highly significant as part of that, to me, quite an imperial period of what Coil were doing in their early Sun period. And so Mute Records are reissuing, to the extent that actually there was a poised reissue of the Hellraiser material, there was an injunction.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah,
but yeah, that's a really big part of the story.
I think it's interesting. Gold is the Metal, which is another transitional object, a bit like it's a bit of a stopgap. It's a really interesting collection on its own, but it's a bit of a stopgap. So that's going to be the first that comes out, and then Mute are going to issue they're going to issue Unnatural History Volume 1, I think, which is one of the compilations, it's made up a bit like the Cabaret Volatire stuff, that they're putting out wee tracks on all sorts of stuff. I've got like wee cassettes and things that they're putting out wee tracks on, because they're experimenting constantly, and they're just kind of like throwing stuff out there and giving it away, really. So that's going to be one of them. Hellraiser, is also going to be a collection that comes out as part of that, and also the Angelic Conversation, which is the soundtrack they did for a Derek Jarman film, which is really beautiful. It's them. I think I described it in my notes as them. It's their most mystic and beautiful.
And Peter Christopherson lived in Bangkok for much of his later life, like huge lover of Thailand, like really had so many nice things to say about it and the culture. I think there was a really beautiful quote he gave in one interview where he was talking about the veil between worlds is at its thinnest in Thailand, alluding to the fact that we're much more connected to spirituality. I think there's a bit in it where he talks about you getting any taxi in Bangkok and the driver will tell you about how he had a brush with a ghost. It's like they're so close at that. And that is very in keeping with their mindset anyway. But Peter died in 2010, I believe, in his sleep. Is that right?
Yeah, he passed away in his sleep. And it was tragic in a way, particularly because Throbbing Gristle had imploded again. Jen walked out, left them with 3 more dates to do in Europe that they were contractually obliged to do, which they actually did as XTG. And actually that seemed a sumptuous prospect in a way of like them becoming a new trio and doing really interesting stuff, and that's all banked somewhere, but I would love to hear those tapes. And they had committed, the 3 of them had committed to carry on, and then unfortunately he just slipped away. And I think you're right that Thailand was actually a kind of spiritual home in some ways.
Yeah, he got involved in music projects there. He was involved in the community, a lot of charity stuff. Yeah, very.
Yeah, when he passed, I mean, I paid for a brick in an AIDS orphanage in Bangkok, a children's AIDS orphanage, and that was part of the process at the end. And then B. Hampshire, who was astonishing performers in a band called Into a Circle, and was also a part of the Psychic TV kind of family. He literally dealt with the funeral, and there's some footage online, and there's a kind of final broadcast, and I know from personal conversation with her as well, it really broke Cozy's heart. I think Cozy kind of referred to him as the baby of the band. That he'd kind of come along wide-eyed and bushy-tailed and joined Coombe Transmissions and formed Throbbing Gristle, and there was always something really lovely and playful about him, and I met Sleazy and Jeff a few times just through their concerts, and I remember the last time I met Sleazy actually was when Throbbing Gristle played Heaven, and I just went straight up to him and we just had a big bear hug, and I was like, "How are things doing?" Because I'd kind of got skinny from Paul Smith that Jen was having a bit of a flake, and Sleazy just rolled his eyes, was like, "Jen is Jen. Let's just do the gig." Like really chilled, really laid back, lovely and friendly, and so I think that really felt hard, I think, when he passed. But I was also, if you look at the way that the catalogue kind of progresses after he loses Jhonn, and they hadn't, as we'll maybe explain, they hadn't been romantic partners for quite some time.
That's right. So they were a couple for quite a while, and then they weren't a couple, but the project continued.
I think they did maybe 7 years together, as not being a couple and being with different partners or no partners.
Peter described on many occasions attempts at interventions with Jeff, and just saying, look, the way you're living is only going one way, and so there's a strange resignation when he talks about Jeff's death at the end. A sense of like sort of coming.
But have we not all? We've all been there with friends that have, you've seen them on a trajectory and they literally slip away.
Yeah. He said that he described it as being shocked but not surprised.
Yeah, but he had his own partner as well. Ian Johnson, fantastic artist whose artwork appears in some of the later kind of reissues and appeared on the final album. And it felt like, in a way, that before Sleazy passed,
was it Ian that did the Ape of Naples?
Ape of Naples.
That's a fantastic cover.
And the reissues as well around that time, reissues of like the New Backwards and stuff. That's all Ian Johnson's work, and you can buy his work at Timeless Editions from as a French book label. Astonishing, lovely, kind of organic, kind of use of bits of animals and like really, really precise, beautiful graphic work. So they had been a couple for quite some time, and Sleazy was maybe absent and spending much more time in Thailand and in his home in Thailand. So there was a bit of a kind of separation as part of it. But the fact that they actually still managed to work together.
Yeah.
You think it's the number of bands that haven't really survived that.
Yeah, no, totally, of course.
Without getting too Fleetwood Mac about it all, but they were, they were still interested in the work, and but laterally and recently, Thipo Sandra's issued their Supersonic 2002 performance. I think it's 2002, and Jeff's not on it because laterally. And if you look at the Astoria gig by Throbbing Gristle, you can see Jeff on the stage dressed in a kind of prisoner-esque kind of suit, so intoxicated and just kind of rocking and almost in trauma and ecstasy at the same time. And it's quite painful to watch because you're watching somebody and you're watching someone that feels like a friend. You're watching them so intoxicated. You're like, this is only going to end one way.
Yeah.
And it is quite bleak. But, the pair of them, when they got together, there was some, literally with a K, there's some kind of magic there in terms of what they could produce and the body of work that they could produce and the quality of work that they could produce.
Talking about Peter, actually, maybe wind it back a second to his earlier career and the boy shop in London.
Yeah, I mean, he's in the Hipgnosis documentary as well because he was a very accomplished graphic artist. So he did the Peter Gabriel record covers. He did "Wish You Were Here" by Pink Floyd.
That's right. He was part of the graphic the company that did what are they called again?
Hipgnosis,
but it's spelled funny, isn't it?
Spelled with a G. Right. HIPG.
Hip. Yeah, anyway, so basically that company was doing all these groundbreaking covers in the 70s, and he wanted to kind of develop their style a bit and make it a bit darker and a bit more cutting edge, didn't he? Yeah,
the kind of like, there's a little 3-4 minute montage about them talking about Peter because he was a partner in the company, but he was really young. I mean, he was maybe in his 20s, in his early 20s, but he'd come along with all these kind of quite bizarre ideas and a super skill as a photographer. There's a massive book of his photography that got published. And, he was really interested in the kind of accident and emergency reenactment society. So he was actually a pioneer when it comes to like special effects.
Yeah, he was really gory, wasn't he? He was really good at gore.
He loved gore and murder and all the darker edge of it. So the little montage is a wee bit like, there's a lovely picture of him with his parka on. And I think it's around Psychic TV time. And he's just kind of staring at the camera with this kind of like, lilting look. So he was really, really eloquent as a photographer and a really good eye to graphics and style. And actually, I think he's not necessarily credited of how much he brought to that to TG and in terms of how TG started packaging themselves. Yeah. But he'd come from an experience in quite a corporate world, actually. Yeah. And then, fantastically, he's the first person to photograph Sex Pistols.
That's right. And the photos were rejected on the grounds that they were a bit too gay, a bit too gay and a bit too racy. Because I think Steve Cook's, one of them's in a public toilet. I think Steve Cook's kind of like handcuffed to a radiator. Yeah. There's a definite Rent Boy edge to it, and it's I think that's 76, and it's McLaren.
And McLaren shits the bed.
McLaren says, "I don't want the Sex Pistols looking gay." It's pretty astonishing when I heard that. I was like, "Wow."
Yeah, and I think it's 1977. He actually did a program for the Citizens Theatre in Glasgow, and he went round Glasgow and took photographs that are like quite bleak and post-industrial because he's photographed it how it was, but also they're beautiful photographs, but the citizens went ahead with it. They were like, yeah, we like social realism, so they published it. So he had that kind of like, he had that career. But I think what's interesting in his Throbbing Gristle.
Can I just add a detail here? So apparently when he did the boy window, the leg, can you explain the context around this? The leg is still out there somewhere.
Well, the leg is still potentially in Metropolitan Police custody.
That's exactly it. Apparently it's still in the evidence room.
So I wonder as well, I think this is all, when I spoke to John Savage, I think it was about Brian Epstein and what's his name that used to manage the Bee Gees, like when Queens collide, basically. So I think when McLaren rejected those photos, Peter jumped ship to Boy / Acme Attractions. And Don Letts used to work for Acme Attractions. And Boy was the kind of rival fashion house to Sex and Seditionaries to McLaren. Yeah, so he did a short window, and it was.
Is it in Soho?
Yeah. I think it's is it Shaftesbury Avenue? It's kind of at the bottom of Shaftesbury Avenue. So he did this window display that was that looked like the charred remains of a young man. like kind of there was a bit of a leg, and it was like the body there was charred remains, and then there were these like fake newspaper cuttings, and then it was almost like a forensic lab, and there were like, you know, like pipettes and droppers and like little testing kits.
It was sinister as shit, and it was based on his like mastery of like gore and special effects. But, but in the window was just a lower portion of a leg.
But if you think about what Coombe Transmissions did and what Cozy had done in terms of showing all of the porn that she'd been involved with, and there were questions in Parliament, he was kind of on track with what TG were doing.
In the best possible twist for marketing, the police raided it.
Yeah, well, there was a bit of a riot as well. I think there was a riot, and they had to shut the shop down for a while
just for this,
because the public were outraged, and then there was a police raid.
Your window dressing being so controversial that the police raid it, and then the leg got seized, and is supposedly still somewhere down there in New Scotland Yard's evidence room.
Yeah, probably with Genesis Briar Peorage's archive as well, because that house got raided at some point as well. I mean, this is the edge of what we're talking about. This is the provocateurs.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the word transgression earlier on, so I kind of want to take a half a step back here and say that transgression, Throbbing Gristle, psychic TV, it's a whole thing. You're not just talking about bands here, right? It's Psychic TV, for example, was formed to kind of blur the boundaries between performance and ceremony. It was actually intended to be like a televisual project as well, wasn't it?
Yep.
And the boundaries between audience and spectacle were also deliberately vague and quite porous, and the performances were designed to overwhelm sonically, visually, and I think in some cases psychologically. That project, sprouted from Throbbing Gristle, and Throbbing Gristle, they were pioneers of extremity and transgressing boundaries rather than just, this is the sound of our band. There were many more facets to that. You mentioned Monte Cazazza, is that how you pronounce
Monte Cazazza. We lost him fairly recently. A very important artist.
It was Monte that actually invented or patented the industrial music thing, and came up with it first.
I think Jen tried to christen it, or maybe Chris and Cozy were involved in where they started calling it metabolic music, and then it was when Monty came over and got involved. Industrial music for industrial people.
Yeah, and it caught on via Throbbing Gristle. But we're talking about like the early pioneers of industrial music, and at this stage it's actually coming from a place of like performance art and really quite extreme stuff. I mean, it's a lot closer to the Japanese danger music than it is to like Orgy or Jesus Built My Hot Rod or that kind of sense of industrial music. It's extreme confrontational experimental art. For example, some of the stuff that inspired away from the kind of what we would typically think of as industrial music is danger music. Japan loved danger music. You had bands like Hanatarash, I think, is the band that drove a digger through the back of a venue. You had the band Jism.
That's the guy who ends up in the boredoms, though, isn't it?
That's right. You had Jism, who ran at the audience with chainsaws, and then you've got other things as well that have taken their cues from that. You've got like Justice Yeldham, who used to turn up with a sheet of glass, and their whole show was putting a contact mic on a sheet of glass, which slowly broke over the course of the show, covering the guy with his own blood. So, I mean, you're talking about a school of performance art that happened, as you said, the music's also almost incidental at times. The music sprouts, and the extremity of the music sprouts from the vessel, the conduit.
And they're around in an orbit in London where you've got Nurse with Wound who are like, really turning samples inside out and kind of really playing with the media. You've got White House as well, in terms of that kind of harshness. And even that slow fade to transparency first ever performance that Mark Almond's involved with. It's just like gay guys rolling around in blood and piss. And it's so ICA out of its nut. And it's almost like, the Throbbing Gristle kind of outrage wasn't enough. It was like, that's base camp. Yeah. Let's just keep moving forward.
Well, that's it. It's when transgression becomes the norm of sorts, especially for a scene. The participants in all of the things we're talking about, whether it's Coil, they'd all been initiated into a musical world and a mindset that saw them intent and challenging norms of all sorts. And actually, funnily enough, ironically enough, I think it's Coil that are probably one of the artists most responsible for steering industrial quote music towards melody and structure from that foundation. So it's probably prudent to get a bunch of names clarified here as well, Phil, because you've chucked a couple into the mix here that I guess existing fans might be familiar with, but I'm sure the lay person listening to this show might not. So in terms of Coil themselves, there are names that will float about. One that I want to get out of the road early is Zoskia.
Yeah.
John Gosling.
John Gosling's project.
And the first release to really involve Coil was a kind of collaborative, like transparent. It was Coil Zoskia. It was listed as.
Yeah, and I mean, what's beautiful and ironic is that he becomes like DJ Mekon via some involvement with.
You're going to see him soon, aren't you?
No,
going to that?
No, I don't have anything lined up. But John's still cutting about.
He's playing down in he's doing a Baba Yaga thing down in London, I'm sure.
Yeah, he's got Hua Records, and the reason he kind of came back into my orbit again was his involvement with Rima Rima. And he's done a remix for Rima Rima, and the documentary about them is phenomenal, and because they were around in that London period about 1979 to 81. So John's a really interesting guy, and also Alex Binney was involved in Zoskaya at the beginning as well. Very, very famous tattoo artist. And if we look at Jen particularly trying to take credit for the modern primitives movement and a lot of that interest in piercing and tattooing, Alex Binney was really important as part of that. So they were around, and that eventually becomes Skin 2 magazine, which actually coincidentally Joe from Security has won awards for some of his latex work. So
Skin 2 still going on.
I don't know if it's online, but it was a big deal, you know. And if you're looking at that kind of like, if you're looking at that kind of like fetish edge of what's happening with people basically reclaiming their bodies, which they needed to do way before AIDS, but I think it's very amplified by that period. Places like the Torture Garden in London, they're quite significant. So
I'll be going to the Glasgow Torture Garden in October.
Yeah, well, Coil are kind of around in that period as well, and around that kind of scene. So and then they're also, as I'd mentioned, White House, Nurse with Wound. You know, they're part of that burgeoning British industrial kind of culture, which in parallel is also happening in the US with people like Monty Gazaza and, you know, as we'll mention in terms of the title of the record, people like Boyd Rice are around, but you know, there's a burgeoning kind of need for extremity.
So in terms of the Zoskaya, there's a kind of like a porousness between the two in the sense that it was largely similar members, and that initial release is kind of a little bit ambiguous. I mean, I think there's one track, is it On Balance, is credited to Coil specifically on that.
Yeah, and there's a bit of a Venn diagram going on there. I mean, they had a couple of their track called Be Like Me that was remixed, came out on Tempo Records, and then most famously they had a record on All the Madmen records, which was associated, I'm trying to think, with a band like The Mob and Crass, and it's called Rape, and it's akin to the special single The Boiler, if you've ever heard it, because it's a woman's testimony about sexual abuse, and it's I actually heard it played at a club not that long ago. Of course, it was solo.
And
it's, you know, so there's an overlap actually between Coil's use of that sample, which I think was Sleazy's kind of like repetitive drony sample, and then you know, in terms of Mouse, who was the singer in Zoskaya, she gives some testimony. Zoskaya technically played a festival a couple of weeks ago in Europe, but but John's not involved. So what's his name? Is it Raymond? Somebody from that band Pig, kind of around that orbit of Nine Inch Nails and Ministry. He seems to have taken up the moniker now. But they were, you know, they were doing versions of that. So
and they were also like sharing members with Psychic TV, basically. So there was there was a whole, as you say, a whole Venn diagram.
There's a bit of a constellation going on
that got kind of cleared up basically soon after the appearance of Coil, Zoskaya, and Psychic TV at a fairly infamous Berlin Atonal festival. In October 1983.
There's video of that if you look it up, and it came out as a VHS.
Basically, Balance and Christopherson just left Psychic TV and Zoskaya becoming the core of Coil from that point. I mean, that's where the split happens, and then, you know, that's just tidied up everything. They were like let's simplify.
I love the story. Tony told me the story when Jen turned up, and Jen had like a kind of Alsatian dog. Tremble was Cozy's dog, and I don't know, I couldn't find the name of of the dog. But the dog actually appears as on the second Psychic TV album.
The singer?
Yeah. Well, there's basically a recording of the dog growling, and it's put through effects and all that.
Not even surprised.
There's a track on the second Psychic TV album, and it's basically a microphone put inside a coffin and then it's buried. I mean, that's how black metal they were, like way back in 1982. But apparently Jen turned up with a dog who was, was a bitch. And Jeff and Sleazy were like, no, you can't bring your dog in, man. We're trying to cultivate male vibes here.
You wouldn't let a female dog in.
We're trying to cultivate mystic male vibes here. You can't bring a female animal into our property, which I think is fucking hilarious.
Wow. And despite having simplified it, in 1994, a good bit later, right enough, Coil started releasing material under various other names, and some of the names used the Eschaton, ELPH, Elf.
Eschaton and Elf. Eschaton Records was their kind of side label. They had Threshold House, which was very much Sleazy's project.
Right. They had the Chalice as well.
Chalice Records happened briefly. I
think they used Black Light District as well.
I think Chalice Records was actually this is a Chalice recording. So this is the Foxtrot compilation, which ironically has a picture not unlike the Genesis album Foxtrot. So apparently, I think it was taken from a restaurant somewhere. It was like a frieze on the wall because there's like bits of plaster missing. But I think they were just tickled with the idea of like the relevance to him then later working out, because Sleazy did the cover for The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway.
That's right.
Nice.
So it's like they're kind of playing with it. But this is actually a really important compilation because it captures a couple of things. It captures Jeff, and actually in the notes of it, Jeff comes out as an alcoholic.
All right, okay.
And I've got the quote here. And then also it's got one of the few Sleazy vocals ever recorded as part of it as well. So they had a number of kind of record labels. Elf, the idea of Elf was almost stuff that you would otherwise discard.
All right.
So Worship the Glitch, as it was termed when Elf happened. I mean, it's very glitchy. I mean, with respect as well, that's the territory that Autechre are in.
Yeah.
And they were around the same orbit as bands, people like Aphex Twin and Autechre.
No question, Autechre would have taken some cues for Coil.
Yeah, I mean they appeared on compilations together. They were appearing along with people like Mira Calix, who we lost. They were appearing at Disalvo Club in London. So as much as they were into the kind of like the ravey aspects, and we might talk about it in terms of Love Secret's Domain, which is literally an acid house, deconstruction. But they were also around slightly later. They're also around in this weird kind of glitchy orbit of what was happening with electronics.
So they used the title Time Machines, I think. There's a Worm Sign. That's another one. There's the Rosamundi project with Rose McDowell.
Rosamundi's. There's not many Rosamundi tracks, but I would definitely urge you to look up their version of The Snowman. Like we're walking in the air. It's so beautiful. And Rose really is an unsung hero.
Yeah.
A post-punk unsung hero.
We have tried repeatedly to get Rose on the show, and she was interested, but unfortunately Rose tends to go radio silent for large spells of time. And
yeah, I mean she's in the Since Yesterday documentary, and she says when she was at school she was asked what she wanted to be, and she said, I want to either be a pop star or I want to be a brain surgeon. and I put a comment underneath that wee quote, and I just said, in some regards, Rose, you did rewire people's minds. I mean, really, the biggest banger that Psychic TV ever had was Godstar. I mean, that's her voice. She's the Angels of Light. She doesn't even get credited for it. Wow. She was so generous. She's involved in all of these bands and all of this stuff. And she's very clear as well. She's like, I fucking hate Nazis, even though she did an album with Boyd Rice.
Yeah,
she's like, she's very clear about her politics, but she's like, well, I'm just going to do some art and I'm doing what the fuck I want because I'm an old punk for Paisley.
That's
and
right.
She also is a nice gateway.
I just wanted to disambiguate for listeners. That is Rose McDowell of Strawberry Switchblade, by the way. Legends of the Scottish underground scene and, well, actually Scottish pop scene. I mean, they were really successful for a
they were a huge band.
Brief spell of time.
She and Jill, I mean, Jill was agoraphobic, and Jill lives in Dunoon at the moment. I can literally wave at Jill across the river, and I've met her actually in the train station, and she's adorable, but she doesn't get out that much.
Yeah.
And she's actually a really good, interesting, fine artist in her own right. But Rose is highly significant, I think, in terms of this constellation, and she's actually to me, she's actually a really sound constant in the middle of a lot of that stuff, which actually at times just gets so edgelord and so fucking boring.
Yeah. So Rose McDowell, there you go. That's one name. Let's put some of these other names into context here. Stephen Thrower, you've mentioned him a few times. 86 to 91, he was a member of Coil.
Yeah, significant member.
Also contributed to recordings by Skullflower, so that's a black mark in his copybook. Specifically, I think he was on their 1990 album Ruins. But since leaving Coil, he's also worked with Identical and Put Put, I think.
Yeah, I mean, he actually had originally started out in a band called Possession.
Mm-hmm.
I think named after the film, the seminal
which is
film.
about to be remade for no good reason.
For absolutely no reason whatsoever. And I think he also followed his own path. I mean, he talks quite clearly about the amount of drugs that were involved in his involvement in Coil, and he basically shat the bed. And he was like, I can't really deal with this lifestyle anymore.
Totally.
But he's gone on to be a very accomplished author on horror.
Oh wow!
He published a fantastic compendium called Nightmare USA, of all of those horror movies. He's done loads of stuff about Italian horror. He's a very accomplished author around that stuff. He also published a fantastic book about the Cosmish/krautrock scene. So he's gone on to be a really accomplished author and writer, and he has his own project with Simon Norris, who I've mentioned in my notes, who was actually, at one point, he was a member of Death in June, but he went on to become a Coil member, and they've been partners for a number of years, and they've got a project called Cyclobe, but they also got one of the last Shirley Collins albums over the line, so they're still quite involved with David Tibet. And they kind of got Shirley Collins out of retirement, and Simon particularly plays a hurdy-gurdy, and he kind of got her really back into her groove again, and she's back being a recording artist.
These crews, man, just working away in the background and all these little things. It's amazing. So you've also got Otto Avery, who's listed as a member on Gold is a Metal and Loves Secret Domain, but according to Sleazy, didn't actually contribute musically. He was, quote, simply a young guy who looked good in the publicity shots.
So there is beautiful photography of the aforementioned Otto Avery, but at the end of the day, Jeff had, a.k.a. Jhonn Balance, a.k.a. Rufus Poole, because I've got an email from Rufus at one point, and I assumed it was from Peter, but it was actually for John, or it was actually for Jeff. Jenny Death was one of the monikers. Otto Avery, Louise Weasel,
that's a belter,
and John Absalom.
I saw that one listed.
It's actually listed on the Black Light District album as all the different monikers that he used to use. But I mean, we can be flippant about that, but I also that just barks dissociative personality disorder. That just barks identity disorder, which it just points to childhood trauma. So I think he's kind of expressing something in doing that, because that's one.
There is an escapism involved. Yeah, absolutely.
I think one of the letters is signed by Otto.
Can I also say, apparently Otto Avery, Jhonn Balance used that, or Jeff used that on occasion as well. For himself. And
the idea was that it was Tex Avery's child. Tex Avery's bastard child. The cartoons,
Wow, okay. You've also got Danny Hyde, who we mentioned, producer and regular fixture on some of the later.
But for some reason, it seems he's in Edinburgh right now. I don't know if he's there for the festival, because I thought he lived in Thailand. And he's had a lot of health issues and stuff. But
should have battered him on here.
As we've mentioned, I mean, Danny's one of the custodians of a lot of the back catalogue.
It was Danny that did that 9 Inch Nails remix that I was talking about.
That's, I mean, we might talk about it, but there was a period after Love Secret Domain where they really got into, there's a whole batch of demos there where they're trying to basically dismantle acid house music and dismantle dance music. And Danny's really critical as part of that, and those demos end up being regurgitated again towards the end of what Sleazy's doing with the back catalogue. And Danny's a bit of a constant, and there's almost a bit of, it's not a rivalry, I think, but Danny's got his own take on a lot of what he was working with, and he's not really credited as a member of the band, but he's referred to as an engineer on this album, for example. But actually, I think he's really deeply critical to kind of getting them over the line, in the same way as Rose's husband, or ex-husband, Drew McDowell, in terms of the drone aspects and the electronic aspects of what they're doing.
Worked with them regularly and then became a sort of full member in 1995, I believe.
Hugely important, I think, and just such a fucking lovely guy as well. When you meet Drew, he's a sweetheart. He's an artist in his own right, but he did a performance at the Tramway, revisiting Time Machines, which he was heavily involved in, and quite literally the earth moved. It was a spooky fucking night. That building, I ended up walking in circles.
Tramway, by the way, folks, is
Glasgow,
a kind of theatre / art space, music space on the south side of the city.
And 2 blocks from my house.
Oh,
that's right. Aye.
Well, but it's a great. I mean, who knows how long it'll last? It could go up in
Don't
flames
say that,
tomorrow.
by the way. If Jeff Ellis is listening to this one, now he knows where you live.
Yep. Come at me, Jeff.
Oh.
Sorry, Phil, you're getting dragged into this.
But Drew gets involved in the kind of worship the glitch stuff. So he's like, see all that stuff on the cutting room floor? We could make something out of that. And it's a really interesting. It's very down tempo, but it's like he can use all that detritus, and he got them. He was the one that got them over the line post this album. He got them over the line in terms of like, let's go full drone, and it's slightly pretentious sounding that you would use one of the stickers that had a psychedelic mushroom written on it, and then you would take the drug and you would stare at the sticker for 20 minutes and you would have a fucking astral projection. You know, it's a bit pretentious. It's a bit gong.
A lot of this is a bit pretentious.
Absolutely.
We'll let them go.
We'll let them away with it.
I tell you what's not pretentious, man. Or maybe it is that Bill Breeze. What a fucking name that is, by the way.
Yeah,
I absolutely love that name. Electric viola player that joined in '97.
Yeah, and I was lucky when I saw them a few times in the 90s. You know, Bill was involved.
Is that his real name?
Yeah.
Fucking hell, man. I pulled the short straw with my name, man. I went Bill Breeze.
Well, they started involving, as they evolve, they start incorporating, I think, the best of what becomes David Tibet's current 93 indulgence machine. You know, I'm with respect to Tibet, I really struggle. I really struggle with the indulgence of it all.
Current 93, again, for the layman, huge project from this era within that milieu of like folk, like neo-folk and sort of early industrial within the British
I mean, the early industrial's got stuff like, you know, we've like Steve Ignorant involved, and you know, it is a kind of like quite an angry kind of project at the beginning.
A heavy duty episode somewhere down the line on this subject. So.
Oh God, I mean it's a huge unfiltered canon of work, and that's fine.
We will dig into our Sol Invictus and.
Jesus, Tony, God love him. I mean, he's still performing in Crisis now. Crisis are still doing gigs.
Back in the game.
Still wearing their socialist politics on their sleeve. But I think there's a wee bit of a connection as well with Keenan, because apparently when David Keenan did that book, and in true Wire magazine style, I would say, he did a sterling piece of work, and then he had to revisit it because he dropped the ball on a number of occasions, and he had his filters, which I understand in retrospect, but at the time I was like, don't be Stalinist about it, just write how it was.
Did you say he was unhappy with the association with Rice and
Douglas P, who were both members of Current 93, and Jeff recorded with Death in June, and it was a bit of a Venn diagram at the time.
Yeah. And these are names that obviously have come up in the show in the past because of that whole kind of esoteric Nazism, esoteric fascism thing, and the drift to the right.
It's not even esoteric. I mean, it's literally influencers.
Yeah,
you know?
well, yeah.
There's nothing mystical about it, and to be fair, it's interesting. I think I've maybe said in the past, you know, David Tibet wrote the lyrics for Fields of Rape, which is, you know, Death in June's kind of curve when they kind of like, you know, it's a frightening record. But he always gets away with it. Nobody calls David Tibet out for the fact that he was a member of Death in June, or he was like, he had an album called Swastikas for Noddy, and because it's mystic.
Nicholas Goodrick Clark has called him out on it, that esteemed academic that documented all this in Black Sun. And we'll probably give Black Sun a wee shout later on, because that's going to...
Well, but it is interesting that, you know, when Keenan's doing all this and researching this book, then he invites Tibet to come and live in Glasgow for 6 months.
Wow.
And nobody knew he was here.
Jinx.
So I'm not sure if it was a relationship thing or something, but he was like, oh, you could come and live in Glasgow. But by then, in true Wire magazine style... Keenan apparently was just like, yeah, mate, I've done all that. I'm into free jazz now. which is such a classic cis white trajectory for journalists at Wire magazine. It's kind of like, I've done that. Now I'm into I'm totally into the free jazz scene in the 70s.
Jazz is so big right now, Phil. So yeah, before we wrap this part of the show up, a couple other names. You touched on Mark Almond of Soft Cell. Mark Almond is on some of the really early stuff. And I get the feeling Mark Almond is a really, really fascinating figure that we'll probably read about in more depth at some point.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of be sniffy about the pop edge of Soft Cell, but he was appearing on national television with a psychic TV cross on his chest, and I met Mark when his autobiography Tainted Life is phenomenal, and I met him at the signing of it at the Arches. And I said, I was interested. You'd done a couple of tracks with Coil. And he was like, yeah, I was emailing Jeff the other day. And we're really up for doing something else together. So despite, actually quite later in his career as a solo artist and really interesting artist.
He's super famous.
Really interesting, lovely guy. It's interesting that both his association with the Temple of Psychic Youth and his initiation into the Church of Satan by Boyd Rice in a graveyard somewhere in San Francisco, it kind of stuck with him.
And meanwhile, my mum's listening to him and Gene Pitney singing.
Well, exactly, but I think that's actually an interesting edge of talking about Coil, because it is similar to what we did with Cabaret Volatire. It's that edge of, can you sign a major record deal and be with the man but do your own thing, versus can you actually stuff things into the machine that are actually quite occult and then the man doesn't notice.
Extremely, yeah. Well, Phil, that was juicy. That was a lot of fun. So we're going to break there and we're going to come back for a second part where we'll talk a bit about these records, including the ones that you've picked out. And then there's a couple of questions I want to put to you about the legacy of Coil and their role and how they're perceived. And I think actually that's going to be a really rewarding conversation, Mark. I think you're going to dig that one as well, because I think there's some stuff that we want to plumb your brain about, as a gay man, as a man working in alternative music at that time as well. I think that'll be really illuminating. So, join us again for the second part of that. Again, if you like the show, subscribe. How, Mark?
Yeah, go to patreon.com/unsungpod, or you can subscribe on YouTube. That's also a possibility.
Yeah, just like the episode if you're watching it, okay? And come back for part 2 when Phil will return. We're all going to go and get a gasp of fresh air and then get
emphasis on the gas.
Yeah, right back into this motherfucker, okay? So thanks, folks.